All right. So, hello everybody. Welcome to lecture, technically lecture. Uh, if you're here, could you please turn your cameras on? So we have Ray, Kate, right. So we have a good number. One thing I'd like to add. So before I start the lecture, so if you go to Blackboard, and if you remember the announcement post where I presented you the table with your names and which day you should attend. So I added a link there. And so if you logged in to your San Diego email, you can access that link and will lead you to a Google spreadsheet. You would see your names and different dates and weeks. Uh, you can mark your presence there. So next to your name, pick the day and then just type in P for present, and that will mark your attendance. So every class we're going to do this. And so by the end of the semester, we'll have the full spreadsheet so I can keep track of who attended when instead of doing it via chat or via name call. This is just a more efficient way of doing it. I'm going to remind you because this is a Google spreadsheet and I'm the owner of it, so I could see who accessed the document when and who edited which cell. So this is a good way of seeing, of keeping track of it. Let me see if yeah, and I forgot, like, you have to pick your section from the bottom if you're not familiar with. So because I teach two sections, so if you go, you would see at the bottom, COMM-265 section 2. Yeah, and I see here, okay, almost everybody is here. So I'll choose. Nice. Okay, cool. And if you're having trouble, let me know. You can have access. All right, so that's that. Um, all right, so we're going to start now. So so let me get my charger. Oh, so today we're not going to talk about theory a lot or at all. Today's topic is mostly technical. I'm just explaining what academic research is, how it looks like in real life, like where you can access it, and how it's structured differently than regular articles. And so there are two things that we can call an article. There are research articles and there are opinion articles. So research articles involve the process that I've talked about in last class, which is to say they aim to explain phenomena in a way that try to analyze it into more basic components and then predict the relationship between different variables. And so you're studying things in communication research, at least. We study things related to media use, to consumer behavior, to media effects, and all of that. Research then takes a topic of the day. So, for example, political discourse on Twitter, or the effects of viewing social Instagram images on body image, or the influence of influencers on purchase decisions, things like that. Research articles will try to find if the claims that people make about different social phenomena can be verified and explained. So the topics I just mentioned, if you're a researcher, you will try to collect some data by whatever methods. So either you collect data from specific websites, that would be secondary data, or you collect primary data by yourself, either via surveys, experiments, interviews, focus groups, you name it, right? So that's one major difference related to the empirical paradigm, that is to say, research articles are data driven. And a research article would also have a literature review, and I'm going to explain that in a few slides. It has a method, and it's outlined the methods by which it, it collected the data, it analyzed the data, and what is the rationale for choosing that specific approach. And research articles are backed by scientific expertise. So you have communication scholars writing about methods of communication. You have psychology scholars writing about psychology topics, etc. So even in the terms of production, by nature, they are written by people with PhD, people working towards their PhDs, by academics. Whereas opinion articles, on the other hand, in which I think most of you are familiar with opinion articles, they are meant to show how things should be from the point of view of the author, of course. The opinion article, usually you don't collect data by yourself. You already have a position towards a topic. So you might have the position that people should reduce their time spent on social media or social media apps. And so you took that position, and then you would use whatever research you find to support that argument. So as opposed to research article, you don't start from research to the position. You actually have a position, and then you try whatever that supports your argument. And it doesn't go through an academic rigorous review. So as opposed to experts, opinion articles are mostly written by pundits or by journalists, bloggers, journalists, and it's trying to advance different points of view without being deep necessarily into that research, into that field. And I would guess most of you have not even seen an academic article before, at least outside of the classroom. Um, so research article are, because research article are found in scholarly, what we call peer-reviewed journals. And I'm going to explain what peer review means in a few slides. You can find them in a database like Google Scholar. It's the most famous one. There are different databases, but Google Scholar is the most prominent one nowadays. And so these journals are published by like university publishing houses, by different publishing houses that only specialize in like textbook, things like that. And you can access them only if you're subscribed via university system. So these articles are very, very expensive if you want to purchase them individually. But if you are part of a university, you access them via the university library system. And it's written by specialists for specialists. So people who would read the Journal of Communication would be communication scholars. People who would read the Journal of African Affairs or are professors of African Studies programs. And the same thing in mathematics, physics. Those are articles that are not meant for the general audience. They're meant for other specialists. Whereas opinion articles are found everywhere. You find them in news websites, blogs, trade journals, popular press, and all of that. And so when I mention in the context of this class, when I mention the word article, I would be mostly referring to the first type, not the second type, unless otherwise indicated. Um, and then even with academic, so aside from articles per se, even with research, the last time I talked about research, some of you were here. But research, academic research is different than like, so we have academic research and we have professional research. The research, as I said, as opposed to opinion pieces, you would do that, you have to do some data analysis yourself. Both academic and professional research do that, but academic research is follows some rigorous and detailed procedure to producing results. So throughout the course of this class, and if you take a person like me, if you want to become an academic researcher, you learn very specific about the procedure of sampling. What is a good sample? What is a bad sample? How you approach people, things that are related to data privacy, and then even to data analysis. What's are the most efficient ways for data collection? How they are theoretically reliable and valid to advance your hypothesis. And then after data collection, you look at data analysis. So there are multiple ways of learning about stats and statistical theories in order to understand how to deal with numbers and translate them into things that can confirm or disconfirm our theories. So it's a long and very rigid, I wouldn't say rigid, but it's at least very particularistic process that researchers go through. Whereas professional research is more, I would say, result driven. That is to say, professional research is also interested into explaining reality, but in a way that is practice oriented. So I study a phenomena in order to understand how it's going to help my client or my employer. So if you go back to the example I mentioned about if social media, let's say if social media use decreases productivity, an academic would then think about what are the processes about social media use that decreases productivity, right? So some people who are neuroscientists will focus on the brain, so and like the cognitive limited cognitive abilities of humans. So you take that topic to expand into understanding the theory of brain, what we would call executive functioning. Whereas if you're a professional, you might be running social media apps and you're saying, well, if people's attentions are limited, uh, how can we make people at least spend most of that attention on our own apps as opposed to our competitors' apps, right? Or for instance, that there's an over reliance on social media apps. So if you're a marketers, what demographic exists in any given website that would help me advance my message? So you see, a professional research would be coming from a different place than an academic research. Um, it doesn't have a theoretical purpose per se, but it has a pragmatic purpose. Um, so corporate and market research could be found in corporate websites. So companies that conduct the website themselves would publish it sometimes, but not most of the time. There are business databases. So if you go to a website like Statista, which is available via the library website, um, you will find data about consumer behavior. Sorry, was I frozen for a moment? Okay. Some of you were frozen. Okay, so I was talking about statistics. So you will find data about consumer behavior, different demographics and their use of social media. You can find things about like car ownership in different places in the United States and the world. You'll find relationship between different things like the pandemic and sports, let's say. So it's mostly like raw data that can be utilized by other professionals, whether they are investors, policymakers, um, marketers, etc. There are others forms also of non-academic research that are closer to academic research, which is done by independent research organizations. One of them is Pew Research. Has anyone heard of Pew Research before? Sorry for that. So now I actually was cut off. Uh, so did you catch me talking about Pew Research or not? Okay, so I was saying Pew Research is a public opinion research firm, and so they collect data related to politics, religion, views in different things in society, like social views. So let's say about gay marriage, about diversity, about different controversial issues regarding, let's say, policing, gun ownerships, and now, for instance, minimum wage. So it's a good source for data. Um, but they don't mention, they don't have, let's say, a theoretical research. It's most of their research is descriptive, like here's what people think, without explaining why they arrived into these opinions and what are the drivers behind them. So academics will then could utilize these data to arrive at those answers. Right? Um, Non-academic research would look something like this. So you can have a company report by PepsiCo. So they would mention, like, for example, the sales data, things about the brand expansion, things about product extensions, what new products have failed, what new products have succeeded, things like that. Um, Let me, so this, okay. So yeah, so and it would look something like this. They are not theory oriented, so it won't try to explore why people stop loving beverages. They will just point like under the so the demographics of 18 to 35 became less interested in soft drinks, and here's where we see the numbers are going. Here we'll see what trends. It's not theory oriented, right? So they just provide the data. So it's interested in direct causation instead of internal mechanisms. So we see decline in sales because of that shift in the generational preferences. Uh, Whereas if you're a sociologist, if you're a marketing scholar, if you're a psychologist, some people study topics like this, like why, for instance, consumers started to worry more or care more, or different generation to care more about their health choices opposed to older generation. Academic research, you can focus on that, but business-oriented research will mostly not. And so this is just to show you a difference between an academic article and an non-academic article. So the academic articles would look something like this. At least this is the title. And both articles about the same topic, which is rising the minimum wage. So this is an academic article on economics, the path through of minimum wages into U.S. retail prices, evidence from supermarket scanner data. Does anyone know what scanner data refer to? You know what a scanner is, right? In the supermarket, you get your, I think you purchase your product. the goods through the scanner. And so the scanner data would record every purchase that go through the supermarket. And so if you're an economist rely on scan data, marketing scholars rely on scan data to measure the trends in the popularity or lack thereof of popularity of different products. So you would see which products are, or which product categories are increasing in sales, which are flattening, and which are decreasing. And so if there's something happening in society or in economic policy, such as minimum wage changes, you could track if that has any difference on the scanner data. So are people purchasing less, purchasing more? Did prices increase or decrease? Things like that. So this is an original research. So remember what I said, academic research articles collect data themselves. So this is one example. We are looking at actual raw data. And from that raw data, they run their own statistical analysis. We're not gonna talk about this today, but they found that a 10% minimum wage hike translated into a 0.36%, 36% increase in the prices of grocery product. And so the adjustment from a 10% increase is only 0.36% increase in prices. So that's what their research. Um, so that's one example. So you see how the article mentioned, just by looking at the abstract, does the author say if they support or oppose raising the minimum wage? Just by looking at the title and the abstract.
I don't think it's necessarily giving you like a for or against in the abstract. It's kind of just telling you what the evidence is and like what they have.
Yes, that's exactly highly right. So we don't see any support or opposing. So compare that to a non-academic article. So this is published in the Atlantic only a couple of days ago. The counterintuitive workings of the minimum wage, the benefits of a $15 minimum would greatly outweigh the cost. So what is the position of the author here? Before we even read the articles, do we see a support and or oppose statement in here? Right. So Michaela, what does the author say? What's her position, for or against?
She's heavily biased and she's for raising minimum wage. So we already know her opinion before
Yeah,
even reading.
right. Yeah. So hence an opinion piece, right? Um, you can actually, I could, sorry. Yeah, you can look up her article in the Atlantic. So that's one reason we won't consider that an academic article, because if you go and just look over that article, she is not collecting data herself. She's not running any the study. She's not running statistical analysis. But what happened is that she has a position that she came about probably from reading works by others. And that convinced her that a 5 minimum wage increase would be a good idea. So she's making an article like for that. So an academic article, so both you can come up with the same conclusion by reading two articles. So at least for a regular person would say that's a good bargain. If we have a 10% increase and that only translates into 0.36% increase in prices, that's a good bargain, at least for some people, right? It doesn't say you should support minimum wage, but people could make their own minds about it, right? But it's still different because in academic articles, like you relied in primary data, so people could look at your analysis, you look at your statistical analysis. You quantified the impact, right? So the authors gave us an exact ratio of benefits and cost. The policy arguments could be implicit. So implicitly, yes, it could very well be that the authors are for increasing the minimum wage, but that's not stated explicitly. They're just trying to show you the analysis they've done. And from that, you can start arguing about this position. Whereas non-academic articles, you get your position from reading either from like historical narratives, personal anecdotes, things by friends, things you just observe around you. And yes, even by reading academic research, so research done by others, but no original data or new data is being analyzed. You can still cite academic research nonetheless. So non-academic articles are not like out of the blue, at least the good ones. The good ones would still rely on some aspects of research, but the policy argument or whatever argument is the key to that. So the core of that article, the main purpose of non-academic articles is to make an argument. Hence, it's an opinion piece, right? It has to have an opinion, right? Uh, so yeah, so what they would then differentiate academic research, what makes it unique, is that, to summarize, so there's a treatment of collected data. You did develop a theoretical framework to explain the cause and effects. The primary purpose is knowledge building. So the primary purpose is to know or address the reality rather than advancing one proposition to change reality. That's the primary. You could, and I am highlighting primary here because there could be some secondary motives for sure, because researchers are still human beings and you picked which topic to choose, right? But then you were still bound by the fact that you have to collect and demonstrate how you empirically collected and analyzed data, right? Um, Another thing that makes academic articles, academic research very unique is like the peer review thing. And so peer reviewed in academy is, so the review by peers, it's in the name. But the way we do it is it's a double blind review. So when I submit an article to a journal, the reviewers, the editor will then take that article without any attachment to my name. So the file won't have my name, my email, or any association to my employer whatsoever, like anything that could be traced back to me. And we will send it to 2 or 3 reviewers that I won't know anything about. So those reviewers, I won't know their names, I won't know where they work at. It's just some other academics. So they would read my articles and then offer feedback and criticism, like, yeah, hey, like, hey, I think your analysis here is a little bit off. Could you please support or give more empirical support for the argument you made in here? I don't think your hypothesis sound, things like that. Or they can approve, right? And so that would take care of the issue of personal bias or favoritism. So it's not that because I like my friends, I will just get their articles published, because I don't know who the article's author is, right? And so by this is one mechanism by which academia tried to establish a level of objectivity on the type of research that is published in academic journals. I just want to, before we move on, I don't want to leave you with the impression that, having said that, opinion articles are not necessarily. So research cannot answer all questions. It can answer many questions, but not all questions. So because we encounter, for example, moral questions. So even when we go back to the question of the minimum wage, is it only an academic or an empirical question, or is it also a moral question? So do we care as a society that every working adult could have a living wage or a reward that can sustain some basic standard of living in our capitalistic society, the oil market society, right? That's a moral question. There's no research that can answer that. If you're comfortable by people not having a good standard of life, there's no amount of research that will change your opinion because that's just a subjective position or vice versa. So not all questions are answerable via research. As I said last class, empirical questions, things that are testable, can be answered by research. And the other thing is that opinions articles are still valid forms of arguments. So yeah, you can learn things from opinion articles, especially if they are good ones. That is to say, some opinion articles would use some, would rely on some good research, would cite very informative pieces, would show you facts from both sides. At least they would be somewhat even-handed, even if they take a position later. But at least they would try to engage you with the argument, right? So that is not to say you have to look at a research article in any topic you think of. You can actually rely on opinion articles from time to time, as long as it's not about conducting research, right? Then we put that aside. But things related to like policy, sports, social issues, blah blah blah, you can still, people would have arguments all the time, and they're still valid form of argumentation, of knowledge sharing, etc. Right. So then when we talk about academic research articles, um, there are two major formats. One, they are academic research articles, and those are the ones that we're going to focus on during this semester, and I'm going to talk about them today. And we have something from critical essays. So they are still academic formats, but they are not necessarily research reports. So I'm going to talk about those on Monday. But for the remainder of class, I'm just going to talk about research reports. So the structure, so they get published in journals like this. Communication Monograph is one example. So they don't look very popular. They don't look, they're not that entertaining. Let me put it this way. And they follow a very specific structure. So you have an introduction, a literature review, a method section, analysis and results or result section, discussion and references. Those sections can be labeled differently or like ordered differently depending on the style of the journal, the editorial policy. But roughly speaking, all academic research reports would follow this structure. Um, as, an abstract is a short paragraph summarizing the study's purpose, method, main research question, and findings. So in the abstract, the authors would say, we studied this topic or we applied this theory to understand this phenomenon. Here's the method that we've used. We conducted a survey with 300 participants, and our main hypothesis was like A and B, and we found uh, ENF, right? So it's a very short paragraph, 4 to 6 sentences. That's it. An introduction, similar to introduction when you write any essay, you try to explain why the research important is relevant, and how the paper is going to address the main question you pointed to on the title. A literature review, it takes like the bulk of the research, most like in many times. So literature review and results are the bulk of the research. Next week, we're going to talk more extensively about literature review, but basically, you summarize the previous literature on any given topic you're studying. So that article I cited about minimum wage in their literature review. They have to summarize or mention previous research that studied the effects of minimum wage on prices. They don't have to cite every single article, but they would cite the major ones or like the most influential ones in the field, just to show what others have found and what you're trying to find. So, for instance, if a topic has already been explored, uh, supposedly you will not repeat it as is. Your research has to add something new. So if someone studied the effects of the increase of minimum wage in California on, let's say, unemployment, and if you're relying, it's the same study design, there's no point of you producing a new research. Unless you're coming up with a counter argument or like they're making some tweak. You're saying here's some gap that previous research has not addressed. But you have to state that in the literature review, right? So you will read that in articles once we continue in our next assignments. You will see what people argue about in the literature review. Um, So you're building upon previous research in order to show why your research is legitimate and how exactly it's going to add to the established body of knowledge. Then the method, you explain basically the procedures, so how you went about collecting the data, how they went about like sampling, how many participants, if they had actual participant, or how they collected data from online sources, or how they collected data from scanners, as we've seen before. So the details of the method has to be outlined in there in the paper. And findings is pretty like a straight up data analysis. So you run whatever statistical test you have, what the data show, and then a discussion. In the discussion section, that's the closest thing in a research article to an opinion article. In the discussion, you basically summarize the findings, but in more, I would say, understandable terms. So the findings are written in a very I would say mathematical. So you would see mathematical equations, statistical test right there. In the discussion, you just try to put that more clearly using straightforward language, like or a common, like an everyday language or a common person language, right? And then you can then, and at the discussion, in the discussion section, you can argue for like the policy implications or like the behavioral applications or like the relational applications. So you could be running a study on interpersonal communication, showing that, I don't know, people communicate better on while making calls than with texting, or in different contexts, maybe texting is better than phone calls. Uh, at the discussion, you can then say what should people do based off the research you just conducted and explained, right? But you never point to that on the message section or the literature review section. You always leave it after you conduct your research, right? So people can see how you arrived at those, and not the fact that your opinion guided your data collection and analysis. And final references, probably all of you, is works cited. So you would follow an EPA style, an MLA style, whatever the journal required. Like every reference that you've used would be mentioned there. And so lastly, I'm going to have an activity. So this is an article. Actually, one of the co-authors is like Professor Bradley Bond, uh, colleague who is here at the University of San Diego. So this article is has been published in journal. It's called Communication Monographs. And so I'll ask you to go to the link. And by the way, The slides are uploaded to Blackboard, so you can access the link from there. Or I will just paste the link in the chat in a minute. And it will ask you only to read the abstract and the introduction. So the introduction won't necessarily be a label introduction, but the first two paragraphs before a new subheadings, those are the introduction. So you don't have to go past page 3. So only the first 2 pages. And I would like you to try to answer those questions. You might not find all the answers, but try your best. So just, what did this abstract summarize? To understand how abstracts are written. Did the author explain why the topic of uncertainty is relevant to the study? Sorry, I forgot of marriage relationship. So remind you of the title: relational uncertainty and message processing in marriage. Which specific aspect the author claimed was not researched before? So in other words, what does the research add to previous research? What things that haven't been researched before that the authors are trying to research? And how this research beneficial, or one benefit of this research according to the authors? But yeah, I'm going to give you like 10 minutes, maybe. Yeah, so just try to answer to the best of your ability those questions, and then we will come back for discussion, okay? So I just sent the link on, just paste it on chat if anyone is interested. Yeah, you don't need to. All right. So you think you had the answers or most of them, or need more time?
I don't know if I was the only one having this issue, but I couldn't access the introduction. I could only see the abstract.
You could
Yeah,
not.
me too.
Oh, so wish. Who could have? How many of you were able to access the article?
I figured it out by I also had that trouble and I tried to like do the access thing, but it didn't let. But like there was like a little box on my corner that said PDF, and then I clicked it, and then I got a PDF of the entire document.
Yeah, yeah. You should see the PDF, right? Okay, so for those of you who were able to read it, so can anyone? Okay, at least for people who read, so now for people who read the abstract, could you answer the first question at least? So, what did the abstract summarize?
I would say that the abstract summarized what the theory was and then how they conducted the research and then just an overview of their findings.
And how long was the abstract? How many sentences would you say the abstract was?
I don't know, maybe like it was probably like a long paragraph, 4 or 5 sentences. I don't really know.
Yeah, yeah. So, so abstracts look like that. So you're right. Like theory, briefly about the what they were trying to, the claim they were trying to test, and then summary about the finding is 2 sentences. That's it. So this abstracts are formulated. Okay, then the second. So did the author explain why the topic of uncertainty is relevant to the study of marriage relationships? Yes, Isabella.
Yeah, I think they explained it well in the introduction. They kind of briefly discussed uncertainty reduction.
Isabella, can I hear you? Could you get closer to your mic? Yeah, yeah, it's now much clearer.
You can hear it now.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I think they explained their the uncertainty reduction theory as well as briefly about uncertainty in dyadic contexts. And I think they made a clear statement that said if uncertainty is part of all communicative encounters, then it should be relevant to longstanding relationships. So I think they did a good job of it in the introduction.
Right. So they were saying if we were studying uncertainty in different dyadic means two people, so interpersonal communication, then that should be also important to study it in the context of marriage relationships. So, which specific aspect the author claimed was not researched before? So, what wasn't researched before? The authors actually made a very explicit statement about that.
I think in the same paragraph they said, we are not aware of any work, however, that has investigated uncertainty as a predictor of communication in marriage.
Right, right. So they were saying, yeah, some studied, some studied uncertainty in different contexts, or some studied the things that produced uncertainty, but not how uncertainty about a relationship status in marriage affects or predict like the communication behavior of the marriage. Right. So they said why is it important, but then saying how is it being new, right? So this is something you do in an introduction, right? So they introduce the theory they're working with, what's the topic is, and what's the new thing they're trying to add. And then how is this research beneficial according to the authors? Why is this research beneficial, important? Why should we care? Why should we listen to them or read or continue reading this research? How is it important or beneficial?
The authors had a paragraph where they noted 3 things
Okay.
that they said had never been done before. And I think the 3 things is that it provided that an initial test of whether uncertainty is germane to communication beyond the early junctures of the relation progress. Second, whereas scholars of interpersonal communication have focused almost exclusively on how uncertainty predicts message production, our work illuminates how people process messages under conditions of uncertainty. And then third, it adds diversity to literature on marital communication.
Right. So here what they're trying to do is like how this specific research would help the study of relationship communication and marriage communication in general. So how uncertainty affects the progression of marriage, and then how can we then, under a climate of uncertainty, what other forms of communication we're going to see. So how is this, so in other words, what's the benefit of this for someone studying marriage, and also for those married relationships themselves? So supposedly someone reading this research have an idea about how to communicate better in their climate of uncertainty in a marriage relationship. And so, yeah, I was not expecting you actually to, you actually did a good job. I was not expecting it. So aside from the technical problem, but yeah, guys, please next time if you encounter something like this that you could not access, just, yeah, tell me right away. So I thought the link worked with other students. So not I could have sent you the PDF. So yeah, just to avoid it next time. But you will read more research articles as we go along. We'll have different practical activities, and so as you could see, research articles, academic research articles, are written differently. Not the language problem that you're used to when you're reading like another written piece. So it follows a very specific structure and some very technical language. And so we will try to help you overcome that difficulty and then becoming more familiar with the terminology and structure of academic. So that's it. There any questions? Okay, then that's it. See you next week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.